This is the second presentation for Week 9 module. Since you all will be conducting interviews for the exam, in this presentation we will examine the process of planning and conducting in-depth interviews, specifically looking at how to develop the interview guide. So this will be helpful for this week's discussion board, but also for the exam that's coming up in a couple weeks. So these are the main steps in conducting in-depth interviews. Select and recruit interviewees, develop interview guide, gather data, and analyze data. However, as you'll notice, you can see from the arrows that this process is non-linear. For example, after having recruited a participant, you gather data through the interviews. You then ask if they know anyone else who could participate, which is another way of going back and recruiting additional interviewees for your research. Or after you've conducted your interviews, you start analyzing data, and then you realize that you're missing a very important question. So you return to your interview guide and revise it for the remaining interviews. So as you see, qualitative research is very flexible, allowing you to revise the research design as you move along. This, again, is one of its strengths. So one of the most important aspects of in-depth interviewing is the interview guide. The interview guide contains a list of topics and specific questions that you want to cover in an interview. It includes main questions that are directly related to your research question, as well as probes, which are follow-up questions that clarify responses and gather additional information. Guides rely mostly on open-ended questions, which are questions that allow respondents to answer in their own words. And a great question to start off with in an interview guide is a grand tour question. It asks for a general description of the people, process, or events being studied. This is a great question to start off with because it allows the participant to speak freely and become comfortable in the interview. Let's review Vasca's interview guide for her research. Here's Vasca's interview guide. It's organized by broad topics with specific questions. So here you can see that the broad topics she covers include family history, immigration, racial labels and identity, experiences of race, marriage, and then a conclusion. Reviewing Vasca's interview guide, what do you notice about the order of topics? Pause the presentation to review her guide. Let's return to take a look at her order of topics. So similar to a survey, you might have noticed that she starts off with an easy question that situates the topic of the interview. She then moves on to more sensitive questions regarding race. Those come later, once the interviewer and interviewee have become more comfortable with each other. Her conclusion is also very well designed because it's asking about future hopes and practices, so you always want to end on a positive note. So as you devise your interview guide, you'll want to follow a similar order. Now let's take a look at probes. Those are the follow-up questions that get at more detail. Let's imagine someone responds this way, saying, "We got along fine." This is not very helpful data for interviews or for qualitative data. It's not very detailed. So pause the presentation and reflect on how these probes expand on the participants' original answers. So all of these probes provide more descriptive information. They're all asking for specific examples of why they get along fine. So for novice interviewers, it's helpful to write down these probes on your interview guide as a reminder that you're supposed to be asking follow-up probes for almost every question you ask. So the information in this presentation should help you as you start working on your interview guide. Remember these tips. Create a list of topics and specific questions for each topic. Most of your questions should be open-ended. Consider starting off with a grand tour question to get the interviewee, the participant, comfortable with the interview and to get them talking and thinking about the topic. Use probes. For almost all of your questions, you should have a follow-up probe to get at more detail. And follow a logical order. Start off with easy and simple topics that have to, or questions that have to do with your main research topic. Move on to more sensitive ones or questions that get the participant to really reflect on their answer, and always end on a positive note. This is the end of the presentation.